Tyson Yunkaporta, thank you very much for your time.
Recording in progress.
That's new, isn't it? The
Zoom
new
just
voice.
told me.
Yeah. She's she likes to keep you in the loop. But
Oh,
honestly,
she's great.
thanks so much for your time. I am really looking forward to this conversation because I have been talking about your book endlessly since it came out.
Oh, I saw you had a good friend of mine on that, Rune Kjarner Rasmussen,
Yeah. He says hi.
Nordic Cannabis. He's one of my favorite people on the planet. Oh
Yeah,
God, he makes me laugh. I just
Yeah.
we just laugh and laugh.
I love that. A million years ago, when I worked for Discovery Channel in London, I had the Nordics as a territory, and it was my first realization of how, because sometimes it's extremely dry, but like how funny like the Nordic attitude is. It's just
and it's the enthusiasm, it's like, I don't know, like they're just like dripping with like really excited about their topic all the time.
Yeah, absolutely.
And very extreme, like rave on totemism and is very much alive, and they're like
well, good impression. I like
carving these runes. And you're like, hey, good on you. I've got a bit of a Viking fetish, so I got a soft spot in my heart for all things Scandi.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yep.
It's
horrifying. Most of it's horrifying, but it's still like enormously attractive. It's very satisfying. There's an immediacy to it. I mean,
true.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's immediate. Yes, it's visceral and immediate and very present. There's sort of no avoiding it, and it doesn't shy away from, I guess, its reality.
Yeah. Everything's very slow, and everything happens slowly. In my indigenous culture here on the Australian mainland, everything takes time and long consideration and many sleepings on it. It might even be generations before we go, yeah, all right, we'll bring that in. Everything's very slow, and there's that constant sort of tension and balance between the individual and the group, the individual and the collective. Because the individual is autonomous, but is also bound within a collective. But that collective is autonomous and bound with other autonomous collectives. So you have this fractal pattern going out, but you're only part of it. And you do have this fabulous individualism, but at the same time, you can't do much with it. You're bound on all sides, and there's no private spaces. We're never allowed to be alone. You can't just go off into a corner. And so there's something just I don't know, enormously attractive to me about some of these cultures of the Northern Hemisphere, where it's just, go, get back to the chopper, is going to blow.
Being on your own in a boat in the North Sea,
or
the kind of like the extreme heroism of the Eddas. Yeah.
And you'd be surprised how much fascination there is in Indigenous communities in Australia for that stuff. That's always our favorite movies, and especially young men. I mean, like, so all our young fellas, they're all playing Grand Theft Auto and all that sort of stuff, and sort of working that out of their system in those games. And we're watching all the Sylvester Stallone movies, and
it solves something in my head, because I did film at UTS in Sydney, and David Gallipil was still alive, and he came and spoke, and he was talking about how his dream project was an Aboriginal Sylvester Stallone film. Like, he wanted to do like a full-blown, and this is like late 90s, but he wanted a full-on 80s action film. And I wonder if part of that is that appeal, that it is that it's almost exotic, the kind of agentic hero tales.
I think it's still too soon for me to say Walwal's name or talk up his stuff, but I can talk in general. That is a so from that generation, they grew up, out on the mission or on the reserve or sort of even way out bush camp, like reading Phantom magazine, Phantom comics. So all those old fellas love Phantom, and they still read the Phantom, like, even though, it's the most, problematic, colonial, whatever you like to call it, from a middle class sort of, educated Indigenous perspective. Now it's like, oh, that's very problematic. Phantom Adolphus, love it.
Fascinating. It is
my
problematic.
my dad's nickname is Rambo.
I love it.
And he kind of actualized. So half my cheekiness I get from him. He's a church elder now too. He's become, but people still call him Rambo because they remember the young fellow who'd he'd hold an axe in his teeth and climb a tree and chop the honey, the wild honey out of the tree, and and then just drop 15 meters and land like a cat kind of thing with the axe in his teeth. And I say, he's Rambo. He just runs. He's mad. He'll do anything.
Did that
and
particular?
He's got the box. He's still got the DVD box set of Rambo that he goes through. And sometimes it's like someone will press the wrong button and it'll go into the French dub settings, and he doesn't even notice that the characters are talking French because he's not really listening to what they're saying. He's not really, dissecting the whole movie. It's just like, yeah, Rambo, go Rambo.
Awesome.
So we all like to just set aside our critique for a minute and just dive into a bit of fun.
Definitely.
A bit of that Western hero's journey, bloody weird archetypal stuff. It's very satisfying. You can tell why people get into it.
Definitely. One of the
not very good for the world though.
No.
It's great for the limbic system of a man. I tell you, it just I don't know if it's great for it. It makes it feel good for a minute.
Yeah. I wrote a long and popular blog post about why the Pirates of the Caribbean films were the most magical films ever, as in the most sophisticated depiction of magic ever. And it is that kind of like Bugs Bunny does the Odyssey archetypal appeal of it. But not great.
There's a lot of it simplistic, but there's some stuff that's like it's got truth in there for how magic works. Like when they tip the boat upside down.
Yeah.
That's the one there.
Yeah, exactly.
Anybody who knows who knows anything about that world, they've just like flippantly put that in there, but that's the whole thing. That's that action there, the turnaround. Yeah. We've got stories for that, like a cockatoo, flying into a stump and finding itself in another dimension. This dreaming story from down south here, and he gets stuck there and he's flying around, but then eventually he's got to figure out, and there's crow there too, but they figure out that how to get out of there is they've got to fly upside down.
Totally. Oh, I love it.
And come out. So there's that, there's that big turnaround thing of having to shift your story that you're using to navigate the quantum. You've got to flip the entire story and totally believe it, but then have an agreement, a collective agreement on that as well, in order to sort of start shifting the reality.
That's cool.
Because in the end, we're in a soup. I don't know if it's a rune soup, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
We're in a quantum soup, and we're really only just, piecing together, co-creating some kind of reality out of it. And it's that solid sort of story that does it. It's a narrative path, that creates these spatial relations. And that's why our cognition works, on the spatial, on that mapping and on story, which is why land is, the source of the law, because that's our collective mapping of the story and of the reality going right back, generations back to the start of time. You start to lose track of that, your boat flips up, you finish somewhere else in cyberspace getting replicated infinitely.
Yeah.
Well, not really infinitely. You can only get replicated in cyberspace and upload half your shadow spirit to that. That's only going to last for as long as it takes for the satellites to start dropping out of the sky.
Yeah,
which will be soon, because there's new satellites up there now that sort of aren't made by comfortable superpowers. They're sort of made by fellas who are like, all these satellites very flimsy. I put big fucking claw on my satellite, throw you from sky into Adriatic.
Yeah.
Finished, you're dead. There's going to be carnage in the sky soon. People are going to find themselves with signals disrupted over a 6-month period and stuff like that. And they're wondering how their supply chains are going to work. And wow, if they haven't got their local food sovereignty network sorted out, things are going to sting for a bit.
I just finished up a show
Yeah.
talking about exactly that, we've, in the West, we've built our most critical infrastructure, or our most critical deliverables on our flimsiest infrastructure. We can't even get an ambulance to work without digital systems, and they're the weak point in the whole thing, and they are guaranteed to go down in one way, shape, or form. Solar plasma injector, EMP, whatever. It's a when rather than if. And so we've kind of like stacked everything wrong. It should be the frivolous optional stuff at the top rather than the base, and it's not. Everything runs on it. So it's not going to be pleasant.
No, not at all. Yeah, not at all.
So
bureaucracies are bad enough, but automated bureaucracies,
terrifying.
Where you've got no capacity to appeal a glitch. Everything's
Yes.
blockchain into a smart contract or something, and you're just that's it. There's no nuance.
No.
There's no, my daughter's kidneys failed this morning. Can I get another 12 hours? It's like, no, you're out on the street.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the peak of non-Indigenous thinking. It's like the ultimate blow off top or singularity of non-Indigenous thinking. It's contextless technocracy. As you say, there's no appeal, there's no human, there's no the challenges aren't relationally composed, and neither are the solutions. It's
well, that digital fascism, that digital autocracy, that's coming from that deep-seated desire in the West, having lost everything, all knowledge, all wisdom, and having to start from scratch. There's this deep-seated desire to be ruled, by a demigod, by a benevolent dictator who's going to just take care of everything for you. And, but then there's that tall poppy syndrome that makes it hard to do that for at least half the people. And so you have to what if it was a non-human intelligence? What if we made a god to do that for us, cobbled that one together. And it's very interesting how much of the origins of that fascism arise from your new age kind of spiritualities. How much of it comes out of the foundational mythologies of that sort of playing around with elements of all that black magic, that occurred, after they actually killed off all the women, particularly, and men and others who were carrying the real, land-based, that animism, and all that knowledge, that plant lore and herb lore and all the magics and understandings and the story. I've talked to a lot of Welsh people about this, and Irish people too, about how hard people worked, even, in recent centuries, to eradicate that, and how much they had to do a resurgence to make sure they were holding on to some of it. But you could see once that was gone, you're in the Victorian era, everybody's having, fucking mummy unwrapping parties and all that sort of thing. That was unsatisfying. So then it's all this, all the tarot and all the, just trying to, recode and then decode this world of spirit that they wanted to encode in sort of simple, predictable ways, stuff that was less chaotic, less nature, more constructed, navigable, able to be gamed and controlled by individual powerful thoughts, etc. You just saw this rise of all the horrendous stuff. From, you see, look, old Blavatsky there, that old witch writing out all this stuff, and who did she influence the most? I mean, world leaders, who followed her? Hitler and Gandhi both followed her. You know what I mean? They both had these weird ideas about this Aryan race coming across from India to Europe. This this mythological Aryan bloody supreme being. All kind of arising out of that. And if you look at the role of, we'll talk about this after, but it's just fascinating me at the moment, where, all of this magical stuff from, astrology through to tarot, through to everything else, crystal healing, everything, where that sits in the algorithmic ecosystem and what that is a gateway to. And you'd be surprised how much fascism this provides, your place, your ecological niche in the algorithm sort of ecosystem how much that provides a gateway through to things like QAnon,
Yeah.
because you're learning these habits of, having the idea of this mysterious authority figure sort of dropping these cryptic wise messages on you that you then get to decode individually, but then get to go out and do this praxis in the world of looking for the signs and then baking that into, more. So that's basically that's the patterning of that kind of, it's a kind of like a cult induction kind of thing. And all of that patterning has just been perfected so much over the last century. It's now, it's boiled down to its purest essence in these algorithms. The drive soccer mums in Utah, who are interested in tie-dyeing and bloody crystal fridge magnets and, the spirituality of dolphins. They get directed through their algorithms to QAnon, and they end up, religiously going back through every Q drop and bloody running out into the streets to save the children. And suddenly they find themselves on the front line storming the Capitol, and they don't know how they got there. And these aren't fascists at heart, but it all has its same sort of algorithmic origin, which I'm finding like fascinating as hell lately.
I think, I
need to decouple all this stuff so people are going to recover a language of spirit and a way of being in spirit that isn't so dependent on this sort of this death wish or this desire to be ruled, by some demigod other.
Well, we don't have enough experience with authentically powerful ways of thinking, so that the dissatisfaction with being lied to is universal, and that's that's what you get. That's how you end up with QAnon, which is like, well, the thing I'm being told is false, but I don't know what right thinking is, so you end up with QAnon, right? So it's guaranteed. We just haven't. And the thing that any of this kind of stuff, you sort of mentioned animist thinking, anything that invites country one way or the other into those thinking processes is dangerous, because it forces you to live in a world of beings rather than a machine world, and that kind of needs the system generally resists that, because it adds unpredictability and squishy.
That's your relationality, and that is unpredictable, and it's this pesky unpredictability of the masses. These irrational human behavior. This is what people are trying to control for. It's what people are trying to sort out. We want to be able to make predictions. We want to have certainty about the future. So we want to be able to do divination without having to incorporate all that pesky African fractal mathematics or that annoying bloody randomness algorithm of coyote dreaming from Native Americans. That's all. No, that's too random. But they don't understand that randomness and that bad penny that shows up, that's the one. It's the pattern breaker. It's the pattern breaker that beautifies the pattern and keeps it mutating. And that's the annoying thing, because it ruins all prediction. I want the stars to freaking align in every cycle to know that that's when I'll meet a tall, dark stranger. God damn it. You know what I mean? I want, and that's on the personal level, but on the big level, you want population control, so people are going lockstep and they have predictable behavior, and that, if this is a wise investment over the long term, then people will be wise and they will all just invest in that, and therefore that stock will do well because it's worthy. And what the hell are they doing with GameStop? Where is that coming from all of a sudden? That's so freaking annoying. We want to control these people. So the entire sort of self-organizing system of this dying global civilization, this empire, it's kind of slowly grinding to a halt. The wheel is slowing down, and it'll stop spinning soon. It's just in this free fall state of collapse and
absolutely
meta crisis, and everybody's desperately searching for that answer. How can we achieve certainty? How can we arrive at predictability? How can we have algorithms that are, computable, so that we know what's going to happen, so that we can just, continue to live in these illusory bubbles. But then who's that we? That's only the tiniest percentage of the world's population. Most of the world now is on fire, It's just, It's just in turmoil, and more of the entropy of these constantly shrinking, technocratic, elitist, safe space bloody bubbles. All the entropy from those are just like, it's exponentially increasing as they desperately try to, complicate it further and tinker more and more solutions.
Well, it strikes
desperation.
me. Yeah, it is desperation, because it strikes me it's actually a good example if we're talking about divination and as an example of the difference between a product of thought and a way of thinking when it comes to indigeneity, because for a universe to be predictable comes with a metaphysics of time. And so the technocrats' solve for the fact that things are getting less and less predictable is to double down on the complexity of their predictive algorithm. So it's actually, the machine needs to work better rather than the machine is based on a flawed understanding of time in the future. And that's the entropy, right? Like it's their solve for the fact that we as humans, as squishy humans, get less predictable is more AI rather than thinking about whether the whole concept of AI is based in a faulty metaphysics.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think, and quite a few people are getting the sense that, oh no, those affordances were there. They were there before. That's all those ones that we thought were weird and like demonic and we destroyed, and rooted out of existence. And, or we just sort of stole the sexy bits and, hung the dream catcher on the wall and then killed all those people.
Yeah, exactly.
We took the feather fan, we took the fez and the
the 20th century New Age was the sort of final, well, I say final colonial extraction. It's not like it stopped, but it was
extractive.
Colonial extraction moving into the non-physical. It's like, well, we'll take your lands and everything else, and the last things you have left is this, but they're as objects. So they are products of thought. A dream catcher is a product of thought. You don't onboard a Lakota metaphysics of dream, right? Which would be, in your parlance, which I've been dining off because I love it, the difference between a product of thought and a way of thinking. Colonial cultures or settler culture remains, because we like stealing things more than anything else, remains interested in products of thought, products of indigenous thought, and less in the to the disaster of the planet, less in ways of thinking.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of, but it's not considered theft.
No.
The intent is not to steal or appropriate. It's like, it's just part of everybody's confused. There's a dissonance because everybody's driven by this narrative of progress. And, they're seeing these things and like, well, and that has to be an individual project as well as a collective societal project. We have to have this progress. And each of us is supposed to, as a neoliberal subject, we're supposed to be self-actualizing. Spiritually, everything else, we're supposed to be doing the breath work. We're supposed to be doing the mindfulness. We're supposed to be finding our own little esoteric practices to build our, individual bloody, road to becoming little bodhisattvas or something floating in a void, and we're supposed to do that in service of the greater agenda of progress. And, and it's an unquestioned good. Nobody questions that idea that, today is an improvement on our brutal past of nature, red in tooth and claw, that brutal, savage lives of a couple of decades at best, where everybody's raped and everybody's murdered in the end, and everything's awful and savage and miserable, and we're sick all the time, and then we die. And if it wasn't for this progress, which is making us all fabulous, and no one questions that. So if you're doing, every aspect of what adds to that progress, every part of the project of colonialism and neo-colonialism, and liberalism and neoliberalism, every part of that fabulous project of progress is extractive at every point, for every individual.
Yep.
It's about extracting, and then it's about outsourcing that entropy to somewhere else.
Absolutely.
Outsourcing the externalities of that extraction. So finding these solutions, solving the world's problems, starting up an NGO that's going to deal with, we got to help out these people with polio, in this country, because, poor buggers, they don't have like a intellectual property rights structure for polio vaccine. That's terrible. That idiot who invented it forgot to patent it, and now it's just like up for grabs out there. So we have to help them out with their polio by finding a way that we can extract value from it.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
like, what are you doing,
Yeah.
philanthropist? You know, it's everything is extractive, but their intent is like, no, we're helping these people, you know. And I don't even think they're just airbrushing things and sort of laundering their conscience or anything. I think they truly believe they're helping, and on it goes.
Yeah.
And same with, you know, everybody who walks into the crystal shop and bloody, you know, buys the wizard and the dragon and paperweight and puts it there, and or adds it to their little altar that they're putting there. There's a Jim Morrison poster and a dried dolphin's tongue and a, I don't know, a Tibetan shaman's rattle and a, you know, they're putting it there. Oh, this is my mesa. I'm doing mesa work, you know. Here are my chanta staves. I'm doing things with spirit. And, you know, I can see your aura. No, you can't. You can't see my aura. If you could see my aura right now, you'd be terrified at what it was doing in response to your little aura seeing. Don't smudge me, you silly little person. I'll slap you right across your face. Let it get that sage stick away from me. You don't know what you're doing with that ugly little girl. You know, these are the thoughts that go through my mind. I don't say them out loud. Sometimes I do, but just to get across that, that idea that there's this, you know, there's this ridiculosity going along with a lot of people, not like thought leaders like you who are trying to steer things in a sane direction and try to, you know, look at the metaphysics of things to make sense and to bring people back to a collective sense making and a collective story making that includes cautionary tales of what not to do. You know, you're trying to steer it back, but there's so many, you're in the middle of this vortex of like just insanity. People just spin around all over the place and dabbling in fascism here. And,
Dabbling in fascism, yeah. What else?
You know,
what else are they
doing a strip tease on the top of Uluru to honor the elders, you know,
Yeah.
walking past the sign from the elders that says, don't climb. We're not even allowed to climb up there. It's too sacred. Yeah, I'm going to go up there and do a strip and upload that to YouTube and, you know, to honor the elders, because this is what spirit is telling me to do. Is it what spirit is telling you to do? Maybe
Yeah.
some spirit, but that's some weird demonic shit you probably want to start getting away from.
Yeah, agreed. So I think that's where work like yours, like Santok in particular, helps, because you mentioned a few things there and critiqued them rightly so. But there are kind of, how to say this, there are correct versions of that or less extractive ones that aren't implicated in the meta-narrative of progress. So there are such things as spirits and there are such things as smoke ceremonies and so on. So I guess like if we turn that into a question and move it in that direction, the subtitle of the book is How Indigenous Thinking Can Save the World. So what is Indigenous thinking? So if we just kind of critiqued non-Indigenous, what are the hallmarks of Indigenous thinking?
Well, it's an externalized psychotechnology that exists in your relations, your unique web of relations. You know, so your thinking and your knowledge sits in the relational space between you and others, in the kinship pairs you form. And that's not just with humans, that's with non-humans, that's with places, that's with landforms, you know, and all of the people that you're in relation to. And you have this beautiful set of relations and it's sitting there just waiting for you to engage with it. And it's up to you how you engage. But essentially, your prime directive is to increase relatedness in that system that you're the center of. You know, you're increasing relatedness across all of your relationships. You're beautifying the relational space between you and everybody that you're in relation with. You're beautifying that relational space with knowledge that you build together, you know, that is unique to that pair, which then ends up resonating throughout the rest of your relational system, which then also comes into, you know, infinitely overlaps with other people's relational systems. And you form a web that defies computation, even just to visualize it, you know, and it sort of acts the same way that, you know, light acts. in the world, which is, it's very hard to pinpoint. You know, you'd be flat out trying to map that, you know, with a quantum computer or anything else, you know, and it's the same thing. So I mean, right there is all the magic that you will ever need.
Yeah.
There is 10 lifetimes of work just to beautify the relational spaces between you and everybody else in your, I mean, you call it network. It's not quite a network. It's not quite a web. It's but it's that's your landscape of thought, and not just thought, but mind. You know, that's where your mind is. And yeah, that's pretty much all it is. It's not that complicated. It's complex though.
Yes. Yeah.
But like if you're just paying attention, you know, from moment to moment, the entities that you're in relationship with in that moment, you're paying attention to that, and you're working hard to beautify that relational space in between you, to increase the complexity, increase the combinatorials, to grow the knowledge that sits there. You know, from the few pits. Say you and I, we might know about 1,000 things between us that are worth knowing, and the rest of it's probably crap. But we might know 1,000 things between us. That means there are 1 billion combinatorials of 3.
Yeah.
Within those 1,000 nodes. So we could sit for, you know, an eon together, just you and I, just trying out different combinatorials of the things we know, and you know, build a universe from that. So there's infinite capacities in each pair that you inhabit.
And the 3 is important, right?
Infinite.
Rather than 2, because there isn't so much an object of thought as a being that is thought with. So if the theory of mind you're talking about, I think with country, I don't think of it. It makes thinking agentic, right? So if I think the tree that's in Riverfield here, the being that is the tree there, I don't think about it. I think with it when I'm in relation with it. Nice.
Yeah.
Nice one.
Yeah.
So that was the
and that's
3
it.
of the compass.
But that's there for your thinking.
Yes.
You know, that's there for you. You know, and that's the trick when you start to wonder when your narcissism comes in. And I have to think about that all the time now that, you know, I've written a book and people are reading it and wanting to talk to me. I got to watch my ego, you know. I got to make sure, I got to look, well, am I really doing this right now? This thinking with this tree, feeling thinking. Am I really doing that relation, or am I performing it?
Yeah.
Who do I plan to talk to about this? And where do I plan to post this bloody fabulous thing that I'm doing, this act? Or am I just doing it right now? Am I just doing that and I don't need to talk to anyone about it? Because anybody else who's genuinely doing it too will potentially be connecting with me out there anyway.
Yeah.
You know, in that mind space.
Yes. In that.
So who am I reporting my praxis to? Who am I reporting my fabulous, awesome stuff to? And here's the thing though, it is important to report it in a relationship where you're exchanging knowledge or transferring knowledge. You know, as people are seeking that practice. And you're like, oh, I can help this person, I can pass that on. But then, I don't know, is there a shift in the power dynamic in that relation then? And are you secretly getting off on that? And so do you slip into guru mode and start bullshitting? You know, that's a tricky thing. Oh, I got to watch myself for that. I got that. It's there. That evil, it's in me, wants to come up and bloody exploit people, same as anyone else. So you got to watch for it.
Do you think there's a natural or natural fail-safes within Aboriginal thinking in particular, but more broadly speaking, Indigenous towards it? I'm thinking the examples in the book of the difference between high context reasoning cultures and low context reasoning cultures. So what you just spoke about there, you're more likely to kind of fall into your own arrogance in a low context reasoning culture, because you will perform thinking with the tree for the gram, but a high context one doesn't really have the gram.
Yeah, well, that's it. But high context cultures are constantly in a state of being corrupted.
Mhm.
That was the other thing I mentioned in the book, was that very interesting stat in there where there's in several places where they're really ramped up engagement with the global marketplace, that the thinking has shifted, the modality, the ways of reasoning and everything else. The cognition itself has shifted from high context to low context.
Yeah.
In some places in Mexico, in what was the other place? I can't remember where. In China, in several places where it's been high context cognition recorded for decades, and suddenly there's been a shift. The more sort of economic activity people are engaging with. You look at Cobra Kai when like Daniel-san goes back to visit that fishing village in Japan, and there's a frickin' mole there. Yeah, you know what I mean? Yeah.
So for me, I think of the growing kind of ayahuasca tourism in and around Iquitos and so on. What was previously a one-to-one transmission of ayahuasqueros is now not.
Yeah,
it's now much more.
I don't know what's more fashionable right now. Like going and doing those ayahuasca tourism, or rolling your eyes about it. Like,
yeah.
You know what I mean?
I mean, I do both.
Hey! That's awesome. I try to avoid the eye rolling about it, like, just because I feel like that's, I don't know, it's sort of so much becoming part of people's brand,
Yeah. No, I had my ayahuasca down on the farm this weekend, and she's Australian, but she spent 2 years training in the jungle, so it's kind of high context in that sense, that she lineaged with. She was the only, she speaks Spanish now, but she was the only non-Spanish speaker in that sort of pod of people being trained, and that seemed as far as I can tell, that threads a more or less appropriate needle through the fraught terrain of ayahuasca.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
Mm.
But actually, I want to talk about ceremony then, because this is one of the things I absolutely loved about the book. We're kind of talking about theories of mind and active thinking. That's a terrible term, but you know what I mean. Thinking as a communal activity with beings beyond the human. But ceremony is, you talk about it in the book, it's an essential part of Indigenous cognition. So how is that?
Well, it's funny. I mean, you can do ceremony on your own, although I don't know if that's more like ritual or something, but when you have that practice and it's so connected to other entities and other people, that you're always sitting in those relations, and then you're not really doing that on your own. So I do know that is a practice. And lots of people will do that. But then at the same time, mostly ceremony is something you do as a group, because you want that thing to happen to your limbic system. I've actually talked about this a few times lately. Like, so, when you start mirroring the action of another person, and so they recognize that in you, and then, they start mirroring you. And then you come into sync because you've got this feedback loop. And then there's this sort of wonderful, rush, this chemical reward that happens where you're both on this high because you feel yourselves to be in relation. And that's kind of like the biological mechanics of that relationality. But when you have that happening with 200 people all at once who are all clapping and stomping in unison, and I'm not talking about like, I don't know, these talent quest shows, you get it like on TV and that, and then someone encourages the audience to start clapping along, and I always go, oh God, no, please don't.
Not audience participation. That's the worst.
Yeah. But then whenever you get these audiences sitting in rows, like passively, and they're all trying to clap together and they just can't, and it always like descends into this horrendous thing, but there's someone standing up front, it's trying to keep it going. Come on, everybody, clap. And it's just like, nah. Yeah. But see, that's where I guess the flip side of that, you see where that works with God bless him, Freddie Mercury, and Queen with that We Will Rock You. they put together something where everybody could do that. And everybody, for some reason, with that boom, boom, chit, they were always in time together, even if it was 10,000 people, which is pretty cool. So I look at that and I see ceremony.
Yeah.
You know, I see the basic, the biological component of ceremony, you know, where everybody's sort of belly becomes one, you know, and that sets the stage chemically, you know, for ceremony there, where everybody's involved in this massive feedback loop. Yes. Between like 1,000, you know, all these different pairs of people in one place. And there's a massive collective feedback loop going on. So it brings everybody into one belly, which is one mind, you know.
So the feedback
you've got that turnaround action happening between that your executive function, which takes a back seat because it flips around, and then the belly, that feeling way of thinking starts to take over, but in a collective. So all of a sudden what you've made there is a supercomputer. And then you get that supercomputer there to run different programs, if you like. That's a metaphor anyway.
No, I love
run
it.
Different programs for like, you know, increase in the landscape, or, you know, part of a mourning process, or funerary rites, you know, different stages in that, or stages of initiation, you know. And so that's what works the magic then, is that big mind. It's not the biology and the chemical reaction that you've caused together. That's just facilitated that big turnaround of that big collective belly, that collective mind forming, you know, and it only forms then.
So that's, I loved it, because I don't know how familiar you are with Eduardo Cohn's work, How Forests Think. But the treatment of metaphor and ceremony as metaphor, and metaphor is a kind of component of thinking, where ceremony both is metaphor, but also metaphorizes a challenge so that it can be run through the supercomputer, or accessed.
Well, that's
so
it.
That it comes
Metaphorizing
back
it
as the answer, right? Because the Avalaruna,
I describe that as an act of translation. So it's the metaphor is the language of spirit. So you are basically translating or even transforming something from the tangible world into a metaphor, and then communicating that across in the spirit.
I think that's baked into the universe. What I loved about this book in conjunction with that is that Avalaruna have, when you're in dream space, so when you are in the dream world, everything that happens to you there is experienced and understood literally. When you wake up and you are discussing dreams with your tribe and family people, because you're in the waking world, it has to be interpreted metaphorically, because it's coming across that dimensional divide from the spirit world into the waking, and vice versa. So the language of getting stuff back, and the language uses things like ayahuasca, but the technology of getting things from the waking world back into the spirit world is that same idea. It has to be metaphorized, or else it won't land. And it just seems anyway, carry on.
But it has to contain, you know, that sort of fly in the ointment that I was talking about before. It has to contain the pattern breaker kind of thing. See, where civilizations went wrong, so they altered their divination rituals, civilizations, to sort of sanitize them, in order to make it just pattern, pure pattern, without pattern breakers. So the ancient Greek, the ancient Roman sort of, you know, augury, you know, they'd sort of taken the Etruscan model and then sanitized it down. So the Etruscan way of reading a liver was a massive, amazing indigenous knowledge system and ceremony and way of working spirit that was just breathtaking. You know, you hear some people, you know, in that region of Italy, some old people who have fragments of it, and they'll tell you about it, just fragments. And you can just see this universe of knowledge. And it all has that kind of, you know, that there always that entropic speck in it that breaks the pattern. You know, it's beautiful. But the Romans tried to sanitize it so that it could be engineered. You know, we will engineer this reality. You know, and even like there is that theory that Stonehenge was built as an attempt to try and bring the lunar year into alignment with the solar year, because that really pissed the early agrarian cultures off immensely. It was so annoying that those things didn't line up quite, you know? So the lunar year is always slightly out of step with the solar year. And it's like, God damn it, we need these things to line up. Why won't that bitch behave? You know, we got to bring her into, we got to like somehow change the orbit of this thing. We got to build a big ceremony, a ritual magic to try and exert a gravitational pull to bring her under control. Because the moon's a woman in the Northern Hemisphere, but in our hemisphere, the moon's a man. So
yeah.
It's a different way.
Yeah. My understanding of that is because the moon comes and goes like hunting groups that you actually get, which is typically more male, and the sun is more like fire and is more reliably ensconced, that you find cultures will have the moon associated with it. The Egyptians had both. I mean, Thoth is from there, so it retained that. Like
they had
really,
no problems with cognitive dissonance in the spirit. The Egyptians, not at all.
They had a pretty good metaphor game too. Like if the entire kind of hieroglyphics system is an expression of that, is an expression that true things are plural, are more than one.
Yeah,
and
I think the Ptolemies hijacked that.
Totally,
they hijacked that in order to get people to like, you know, irrationally, you know, conform to a system of exploitation that absolutely there was nothing in it for them.
Yeah.
And so they used it as a form of social control. Like they did that extraction of spirit, and they sort of opened something that was a closed loop before. They made it an open loop so they could extract and then dump entropy elsewhere, spiritually and, you know, in terms of physics, you know, within their empire.
Well, we get the sort of beginning of imperial logic is Greek, right? So that sort of dualist Neoplatonic idea, and the dumping of entropy, the building of the exhaust pipe of progress happens there, where physical matter is considered polluted or lower than this sort of unreachable spirit. So they kind of they broke it and they tried to fit the whole world into this new schema. And that was the beginning of it.
You're trying to set it in stone and make this hierarchy last forever. You're trying to hold on to this permanent power structure, but in the end, it just opens you up and makes you vulnerable to bigger fish. You know, any Roman with the ass out of his pants can walk in, swinging his dick, and bring your entire empire to its knees. You know, Mark Antony comes in, Caesar, then Mark Antony, and you know they all came in swinging their dick and basically, you know, opened the place up for Octavian to just pretty much smash the joint.
So we mentioned pattern thinking, which I think would be a reasonable hallmark, or pattern thinking of broadly speaking Indigenous thought includes, as you say, a sufficient understanding of pattern thinking to know when it needs the bad penny, right? So it's not the observation of patterns; it's understanding the patterning of the universe to work with it and amplify it when needed. Was that reasonable, do you think?
Yeah, but I just really love that language you're using, a bad penny.
Yeah.
That's the one.
Yeah. Good metaphor.
Yeah, man. That's good story right there.
Nice.
That'll stick. I like it.
Cool. Do you know who Owen Barfield was?
No.
No, he was one of the Inklings.
You can tell me and then I'll know.
He was friends with Tolkien and all that, one of the Inklings. And he developed this, I learned this from Gary Luckman, who's been on the show a bunch of times. I love him. But he was translating, I think, Pliny at college at Oxford. And he suddenly realized that metaphors should be less descriptive, because in the kind of Western theory of logic, they are a step removed from reality. So he saw the words "he passed out of life" as a metaphor for someone who died. He was translating out of Latin into English. And he realized that is better. Like it's not prettier, it is, but it's better. It more accurately captures what a death is, rather than saying he died, right? And consequently he built this whole theory of language that was the reverse of the kind of UG model, the model where one day I wake up and I hit my head on the cave roof, And the next day, the person sleeping next to me says, ugh, and I don't do it. And this kind of idea, because there's no, if anything, the history of language goes in the opposite direction, where we were more symbolic and more metaphoric. And he found, if you look particularly in European languages, that declines. So we're actually heading in an opposite direction, and that metaphors and symbolic thinking was our original linguistic form. And simply, and because it is better, like it conveys truth in a way that our so-called like real or prosaic language can only approximate.
Well, it's like everything about the past is like this weird backwards extrapolation, from modern theorists trying to apply, these cause and effect logics, and, but especially so things like, so trial and error is like, your gold standard method of inquiry for the, your world of progress, your civilization. Trial and error is rewarded and it's enshrined. It's like, don't be afraid to make mistakes. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. You learn more from a mistake, but in indigenous cultures, that's shame. You don't do that. You don't make mistakes. You better not make a mistake. It's like, you don't do anything until you know how to do it perfectly. So you don't, throw your first pot until you've spent 1,000 hours watching a master do it. And you know that when you do that first pot, it will be perfect. You have to do that. So we don't have trial and error. But so I guess when, scientists and historians try and project backwards onto a trial and error model of how language came about, then that's how they have to do it.
Yeah.
And they project everything backwards in that way. It's like, like it's this pseudoscience, and it's weird how much they record as real science. That's really just them sort of thinking, they just watched an episode of Bear Grylls and they're imagining, what would happen if I got sort of thrown, back in the shit, back in the day before there was rule of law. It's like we didn't have rule of law for 1,000,000 years. Get out. But anyway, when everything's chaos and everybody's just running around doing whatever they want and sort of dying all over the place, and there's always a saber-toothed tiger there. I don't know why. They weren't everywhere. But anyway, and not knowing where the saber-toothed tigers are, like, but indigenous people, we always know where the predators are, at any time of day, in any season where they are. So I don't know how that works, this hypervigilance bloody theory of, how our brains developed. But anyway, so they throw themselves out onto that savannah and imagine, well, what would I do if I got thrown out there with absolutely no restraint, if I couldn't get arrested for anything or shot, and I could do whatever I wanted to, there was no police. Oh, well, I guess I just start raping people. So and then project it back. Yeah, like caveman times, it was all rape. And that's why,
it's so the
Facebook advertising,
But that's it.
They just like do this through line of horse shit back from their projected fantasies onto what was. And that's the stuff that Rune struggles with, because he's got a whole heap of Nazis right now who are always trying to co-opt Nordic animism and sort of bring things forward to suggest that fabulous white supremacist past. They're trying to reconnect with some, original, supreme being. And he's like, no, you can't do that. That's, how he is.
Yeah.
He gets all excited up. I love it how he talks.
Yeah. Just so stories, right? Like, it's a high imperial just so story. And what's funny,
just so stories,
is that
how the camel got its humps.
Yeah, because the thing that they will racistly accuse other cultures of, like, well, that's their understanding of how trees work or some other nonsense. It's literally what they're doing when it comes to language, because Barfield would say trying to find the origins of language is like trying to find the origin of origins, because you can't get behind it to do it. But a machine universe, everything else in the sort of fantasy of progress begins with lack of complexity and proceeds into complexity. That's the Darwinian model. That's the rest of it. So they look backwards, and despite there being no evidence at all for the UG theory of language, it just has to be, because, as you say, look around, Facebook advertising, capitalism, like it's their own just so stories. And it's funny because they're leaving, I think, this immensely potent technology on the table. And technology is even kind of the wrong word there. The language of spirit is metaphor, and that's baked into the universe.
Well, and they're missing things when they're not really listening to Indigenous people with, I mean, there's so many things there. Even if you wanted to maximize your extraction, you'd listen, you need to listen better. You know, I can remember sitting there, I had to do this translation, you know, while my dad took this bloody ethnobotanist through all the mangroves, showing them all these, you know, previously unrecorded orchid species that no one had noticed before. There were hundreds of them and he had a language name for all of them, you know, and so I had to help out with the translation and transcribing those into, you know, how that's spelled. Because he can talk Wicmulcan, but he doesn't write Wicmulcan, but I can write it, even though my speech is bloody not as good as his, of course. It's useless, but I can write it.
Better than mine.
So anyway, that was my job. I was just there to help him out with the spelling, basically. You know, I'd say translation, but you know, I think I'm bigging myself up too much. Yeah, and he goes along telling all the stories of these places. That's lovely mythology. And there's one of the stories about how, and in that story, part of the knowledge, he's trying to show him the songline and the river and everything else. And that big story of traveling along there, there's a whole heap of things like, well, how this particular orchid can be used to desalinate, you know, a bucket of water so you can drink it. And it's like, well, that's important.
Yeah, put that in.
And I sort of kept looking at this scientist and then looking back, and he's just got this blank stare and he's nodding. Yes, that's a beautiful myth. That's beautiful. You know, and just went on. And I'm like, well, I'm not going to draw your attention to it. We can just have our fresh water when we go fishing, and you can keep trying to tinker your desalination plants.
Yes, exactly.
You know, that's a different kind of plant altogether. They're going to use a plant that's like made out of steel and covers like 1,000 acres and, you know, burns bloody 50 tons of coals to make 1 barrel of water. Off you go. Off you go. It's mad, eh?
It is. It's the assumption that what we're talking about are like less accurate versions of science is so stupid when science can't get out of its own just so stories to begin with. Like,
I'm going to see in a week, I'm going to see this Eldo was telling in Western Australia, telling me, so we've got trees all over Australia called she oak, and you'll find it all over. And it tends to grow especially where fresh water is flowing under the ground into the ocean. And the she oak is, everybody agrees on this. So everywhere you go in Australia, it's the memory tree. And it sort of hangs down. It's got very long string-like leaves. They're not even really leaves, but they just sort of hang down, you know, beautiful. It just hangs. And it gets just when you're shedding skin, just as you walk past, you know, every single being that comes into contact with that tree, it takes the DNA, you know, through the ants will take that and down through the mycelia and the roots, and it goes up in, and that's the memory tree. It holds the memories of every single being that's ever encountered it, and then passes that on through the seeds to the next. So it knows everything that every human has ever known forever, going back to whoever's encountered that over the last million years. That's huge, eh?
Yeah, it's amazing.
So that's that memory tree. But and it shows how the energetic systems work with going through the thing and how they communicate with each other across massive distances. That's all that dreaming story, and that's all that's lovely fantasy. And he told that in a workshop that had a few people, and in that workshop was an actor, and that actor's name was Sam Worthington.
Yeah.
And then that elder was quite surprised a couple of years later to watch the movie Avatar.
Yeah, okay.
You know, in which that they had that spirit tree there, and that was the one that carried all the memories of the people. And then they were sort of doing all these scientific tests to see how the roots were, you know, intertwined with the roots of other trees and then stretching through a mycelial network that went everywhere. And that at the time was like, you know, oh, wow, like that was this sort of spiritual, metaphysical idea. And then all of a sudden you're seeing TED Talks of, you know, biologists who are going, oh, all this is happening under the ground. All these trees are doing all this communication, exchanging bloody information and all this sort of stuff. And these mycelial works are actually working like this. And, you know, you see the sign, and then all of a sudden the far-fetched idea from Avatar is not a far-fetched idea anymore. That's science. Yeah. And, but then, you know, that came from another far-fetched idea
Well, I
That was
think they're
quite an
just
old
getting,
story.
yeah, and I think they're just getting, they have no idea what's ahead of them if they keep pulling on that, right? So, I presume you've read "Thus Spoke the Plant" by Monica Gagliano. She's been on the show too, but she's a plant biologist who.
Thus Spake Zarathustra. I didn't read that, but
Oh no,
I didn't get
this
to the
is. I
plant
think
one,
it's
yeah.
the best science book I've ever read. It's brief, but she's a biologist who deals with plant intelligence, and she'll go to the jungle. Sorry, it's afternoon here for people watching it, so I'm getting the Mysterious Cities of
Yes,
Gold
you're right.
treatment. But she will go to the jungle and diet different plants, and so she'll have Amazonian plants telling her what to like amendments to her research projects in Western Sydney and all the rest of it. And to encounter the plant as a full being, it's very different to allowing for molecules in it to have a certain kind of action. So particularly in Peru, like Ino Moxo, who was like Peru's Merlin, although he was real, as in a physical human, probably their greatest curandero, and he died at about the age of 99 in the 70s. He was, for a couple of decades, pharma companies would contract him to go out into the Amazon and see how they could weaponize certain plants for things like diabetes and whatever. And so he'd go and he'd find them and he'd, be paid for it and give them the plants that would then be turned into medicines that would eventually stop working. But if he was to treat people with diabetes using the full plant, like the plant spirit, and approached in the right ceremonial context, it would be a cure. And so there's we kind of allow molecules to have action, but biology is sort of right on the edge of hopefully approaching a plant as a whole being and beings as whole beings, right? And I think they have no idea what's at the other end of that realization, which is kind of exciting.
Yeah, that's it.
This brings up.
It is interesting when you start to exist in relation to plants as entities, as sentient entities.
Yeah.
And you're looking at a lot of those ones, people could say plant teacher, all that kind of thing, whatever your language is, things do switch around a bit. It was an interesting question come up in discussion with the Turtle Island Institute we were having recently. Me and my woman were talking to them, Melanie Goodchild there. And, it came up in their circle of elders that, alcohol, was being used a lot all around the world for hand sanitation during COVID. And the elders wanted to know, like, who is doing the ceremony to thank alcohol for the work it's doing for us right now, and, that blew my mind there.
Yeah.
It's like thinking of it like that, because I've always thought of alcohol as quite an evil thing, but it's not really. It's just, it's just another entity doing its work. And,
yeah,
right now it's helping out and it's doing its work and a lot of heavy lifting for all the world. And, and who's doing ceremony for that?
I love
entity?
that. Yeah, I love that way of thinking. So, but it's the divide is the spirit one, right? So it's a being one. And I mean spirit in the sense of indigenous thinking. Correct me if this is wrong. Indigenous thinking can't be called that without some understanding of spirits specifically, right? Like you can't, it doesn't necessarily have to run on them, I guess, but like for your book, there's a few instances of like explicit spirit contacts and explicit spirit encounters in it. And as you say, it's quite a popular book now. And I haven't heard you talk about as much as that. People will nod along and look at the and put the book in dialogue with stuff I'm very interested in, like permaculture and ecological interventions. But there's spirits in the book. There's smoke ceremonies and ghosts and I mean, how is that going?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think most people gloss over the bits that they sort of need to sort of sanitize out of the message they get,
Yeah.
Like I've heard a few people complain about, like, who've been disgusted about my talk about armpit sweat as medicine. Male armpit sweat specifically as medicine, because that bothers them. For a start, that you're suggesting that maleness is biological or chemical at some level. But then so that's annoying. People rather not touch it, but then also just the disgust that people feel. Because they have to be sanitizing their body all the time. And sort of denying the sense, the pheromones, the everything else, and the impact that has on people around you. I mean, it's supposed to have an impact, that stink.
Yeah.
That does a lot of things to protect your family, the smell that comes out of the males in that family.
So I remember,
for a start, I mean, scientifically, it regulates the menstruation of all the women in your group.
Really?
Yeah, well, not regulates it, but women are menstruating earlier and earlier and earlier now, earlier than at any time in human history. And it's because they've got strange men around them all the time that they aren't related to. So they're getting strange smell, or they're getting no smell because they're completely covered up with deodorants. You know, that's my theory anyway. That's why you're getting 10 or 11-year-old girls where the menstruation's starting now, because they're growing up with, well, you know, not their real father or their real uncles or their real cousins or brothers around them. You know, they're staying, you know, that split, that family goes somewhere else, and then all the men there are covered in bloody deodorants all the time. So their system's got nothing to bounce around with. And it's, I mean, you know, you can look at the science for it. It has massive effects on the vascular system of females, like huge effects, just like one drop of male sweat, armpit sweat, you know. So of course that's medicine.
Yeah.
In certain relationships. So mother to son to mother, for example, in that relationship, that does something, you know, that can really help with, you know, with a blood clot, with an internal bleed that won't stop, for example. You know, these are things that I've used and done myself.
Yeah.
You know, with my own, you know, it's real thing, you know, for us, and it's not through trial and error. We know this through long memory, and it's real in science too, except the only studies they've done is to try and figure out figure out products for roofing women through the nose. You know, that's you see the subject of all the modern contemporary research about, you know, male sweat pheromones. You see it when you go to the airport, and then you got the vending machines of bloody pheromone spray there that you can get to try and trick a woman into sleeping with you while you're on your stopover. It's like, oh, that's it, is it?
Yeah. So it's like, this is a really good example of an understanding that is more holistic, and that where it has challenged it than scientific. Because I recall in Auntie Munya Andrews' book on the dream time that one of the
you don't want to talk about the sweat either.
No, that's it. Like,
nobody wants to talk about the sweat. No. Anyway, it's better to talk about Auntie Munya.
There are two ways there are kind of two ways she suggests to greet the old people of country, and one of them is to like throw stones beforehand, to kind of like, if you're going to an unfamiliar place, to let people know that the spirits are there, or that you're there, and it's kind of acknowledgement. And the other one is you can use armpit sweat. She said you can kind of put armpit sweat in a local body of water to just let the old people of country know that you're going to be there. So I was just coming back to your point that there is an actual language of efficacy around why those sort of things would work in the first place.
Yeah, that's it. And it's that, I mean, you know, modern people have no respect for fluids, you know, for a start. These are all sacred things, and you can take it from somebody whose totem is urine, which most people don't want to hear about either. You know, it's fluids are sacred, and you have that exchange with your fluids in a place when you come into it, you know, so that they know, the entities in the place know your smell. That place knows your smell, and it'll welcome you when you come back. You know, if you're coming to a new place, you put that armpit sweat, you know, on a rock or on a handful of sand or something, and then that goes into the water, and then the water carries that everywhere. Yeah. And you're calling out your name while you do it, because then the place knows your name. So that frequency, that sound, that particular algorithm of sound that's resonating with the scent signature as well. And everything in that place is familiar with you then. Yeah. You get like this passport anytime you come back through. You look at that, but I look at, and there's lots of things. So some people, it's about a very noisy washing of the face in the water, and, you know, getting that snot out into the water as well, and spitting. I look at that, and then I look at that Viking practice of the same. You know, the one you hear things about it, and Christians were horrified when I see them doing it. They pass this washing bowl around the room, and they'd all kind of wash their faces in it and rinse out their mouths with it and spit it in, and then, you know, blast their boogers in it, and they pass around this big bowl of snot that they all kind of shared together, you know. And but you think about that group sort of bonding of,
Yeah,
they're all sharing, you know, they're sharing all their viruses, they're sharing all their, you know, at that sort of, you know, at that chemical level, you know, all the bacteria, all the parasites, and, you know, they're all going to end up having the same, you know, the gut flora is going to be the same, and everything else, you know, they don't need a fecal transplant. Vikings, they're good.
So one of the things I noticed when I did the dieta in the jungle, the ayahuasca dieta, there's certainly no deodorant, there's no toothpaste, no chemicals at all the entire time you're there. And it is that it's becoming jungle by becoming human, because you smell like a human in a way that you have never before. You like, you have a waterfall you can rinse in is the closest you're going to get to a Western understanding of clean. And by the end of it, you are like in every sense in relation to the jungle around you, because obviously you are in that spirit sense. But by the end of it, like the tarantulas that are in your little tumbo on day one, you're like, that's a bit weird. But by the end of it, they're just there, and you're there, and the snakes and what have you. Just living. So there's a whole language.
So are you hetero, or ever experienced a hetero relationship?
I have very long ago,
very long ago. Hey.
Yeah.
So you were with a woman how long ago? Many years?
20
years. All right.
Yeah.
So do you remember in the first 6 months of that relationship, she's always trying to like wear your shirt?
Yes.
You know, in the morning after? Yeah. That's a thing. You know? There's a reason for that, why they want to wear your shirt, bro.
I think it's called the boyfriend shirt.
I'd be really interested, because I haven't had a boyfriend yet in my life. It's my life's not over. It might yet happen. You never know. But do boys do that too? So like they try and wear your shirt if you.
Well, in our case, it's more practical.
Or are you the one who's trying to wear their shirt?
No. Like in our case, it's more practical, because you probably like it is actually like clothing of that gender. So it's not. They don't wear it to be cute. They're like, can I borrow this shirt? It's like, yeah, all right. Yeah. It's kind of more. It doesn't have that. It doesn't have the kind of, because there's a word for it. It's like the boyfriend sweater or something. It's where girls will wear
boyfriend jeans thing.
And you kind
I heard about that.
Yeah.
That's like, it's fucking disturbing. It's like, you know, that fashion would disturb me. These 9-year-old girls walking around. These are my boyfriend jeans.
Yeah.
It's like, it's like, no, stop it.
Yeah. One of the things I like, just coming back to metaphor and the logic of spirit, there's a couple of things that Santok explained to me that I knew of, but was kind of unaware of. And one of them was the sort of the smoke logic of smoke ceremony. Coming back to that idea of metaphor, that it grows in the earth, but it lives in sky country, and then you set fire to it, and then it's neither immaterial or material. And the whole kind of logic of it, whenever I'm using incense or whatever in ceremony now, I go back to that characterization, because it explains why we do that on a universal basis, right? Like it actually gives the logic of, dare I say, why we burn things, you know?
Yeah. Well, it occupies a liminal space.
Yeah.
And so as such, when you're coming into that, your own liminal space of being in ceremony, which you kind of do, you know, you give this kind of, I don't know, sort of transparency, but you know what I mean? There's that liminality that happens. You can't quite describe it. Yeah. You know, because you never know where it's going to go. But that's something, you know, Dad always asked me with that smoke, you know, he's really, you know, he looked me right in the eye every time. He goes, did it go through? Did it go through? And I'm like, yeah, it went through. And if I go, no, it didn't, then he's, he's got to wait. Like he'll stop and he'll wait, like for you to get your shit together and come into the right space. And then if you don't, then it just doesn't go forward. Nothing happens, you know.
No. And I take that really seriously now. There's Palawa groups down here in Tasmania that do smoke ceremonies before events. I was at a festival called on the East Coast about a month ago, and it opened with a smoke ceremony, and everyone's kind of queuing up to go through the smoke. And I remember that. Did it go through like, come on, get it around the belly?
Yeah, it's gotta Jesus, quick. Ah! It's funny though, when you really want it, really need it, that's when it bounces straight off you.
Yeah.
It's really hard when you feeling that urgency, especially if there's a lineup. You know, I'm getting sick of that one everyone's got a line up for the smoke.
Yeah.
It's like, it's not how it happens. You just everyone comes around and you just get it.
Yeah.
And you get it together, and you don't do it individually in a lineup. You know, surely you'd be with someone, at least be with one other person where you're both helping each other, because you work the smoke better together in that relation than you do on your fabulous own. You know what I mean? Yeah. So I often like have trouble with that one, and how there's no regulation there, because it's like, well, if you're entering the ceremony space, you can't be leaving anything behind, but they're kind of, there's no one there. Like, you don't have elders anymore saying, you know, nah, that didn't go through, go back.
No.
Go back. You can't come in. That's got to go through first. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's not that strictness. I was at one recently where this weird white lady sort of stumbled around the edge of the thing, and she like dodged the smoke. Like, she clearly dodged it. And while she dodged it, she's muttering to herself, I was fucking kill him all, and just walked straight into the space. And I'm like looking around. Anyone
want to take
this
that?
This isn't my country. This is my country, so it's not for me to say. But anybody, really, you want me to come into this space here and do this thing with you here? I'm a bit worried. You know, I don't know what she's carrying in there, but it doesn't look good. There's some kind of, she'll like be like Sigourney Weaver in Ghostbusters or something. 5 minutes in, she'll be like, you know.
No, I watch the smoke coil around rather than hit people, going like,
Yeah. But then there's that part of you. Oh, I've got it too. That part of you, bros. You feel it, like that one that's judging, like, they don't know. I know. I'm fucking awesome.
Yeah.
I'm a beautiful and fabulous being who knows special things. Come and learn my secrets. You know, you got to kill that one in you before it comes up.
Definitely.
That little Merlin wannabe in there. That bastard. Oh, he's in there. I gotta rule him with a stick.
Well, this comes back to what we're talking about before, about thinking and both holding and transmitting knowledge, and the risks associated with that, right? So towards the beginning of the show, because something you mentioned in the book, I don't think I've heard you discuss elsewhere, that you would to embark on a project like Sand Talk, you actually need protection. So and was that ceremony stuff to go, well, if I'm gonna sit with and attempt to convey knowledge, that is a spiritually fraught process. Are there protective protocols you go through to do something like that?
Yeah, they are. But I was often asking the wrong people,
right,
to help me with that. You know, because you know, I'm down south here trying to do that, and I'm trying to find the right people to do that with me. And there are law people, but you know, they're very busy because everybody needs them. You know. So it's finding the right people to do that, but then making sure you're in good relation with them, you know. And, you know, I don't know. We all have that shitty part of us that, like I'm just talking about, that Merlin wannabe in there.
Yeah.
Thinks they're special, want to be special, wants to like attract the white gaze or whatever.
Yeah.
You know, and you got to keep it under control. And I don't know, some of the people are asking to help me out with, you know, doing this the right way. They were either steering me wrong or, like, you know, not helping. and on purpose, like they knew what they could do, but they also were feeling jealous that I was going to be writing a book and they weren't.
Right, I see. Yeah.
And I'm like, well, write a book then, bros. Jesus, if you want it that bad, and just write an epoxy book. But I just want to make sure, you know, I'm protected. So I did come into it, you know, like, I don't know, with some protections, but some of them were good and some of them were no good. And I was being too humble about not just, like, I needed to build my own practice back up and put my own protections back. But, you know, I was being too like, oh no, I'm on other people's country, I have to show respect and, you know, go their way and all that sort of thing. And I was being too respectful and settling for, well, having no protections at all, rather than, you know, coming in all arrogant and doing, you know, it's been a long time. I still haven't been here long enough to be able to recover my own practice and do it properly. And so that makes me vulnerable, makes me sick, makes me, look at this fucking belly here. That's disgusting. Yeah,
don't get me started.
I've got absolutely, yeah. We got no qualms with body shaming. Traditionally, we don't have body positivity.
Yeah.
Look, you know, and it's different for men and women too, because, you know, women are built to put fat and to carry fat. You know, they need that. They've got more intensive things they need to do where they need to draw more reserves. They're supposed to put fat. So women are beautiful when men are not pretty when they get fat. And it's not even about good. It's like, oh, but you don't have to be good looking to have a beautiful soul and people can read. Yeah, that's true, bros. But your kidneys are going to fail.
Exactly.
You know, once your middle starts to get as thick as mine, I'm about 20 kilos too heavy. And that's too much because half of that is packed around my innards. And so my organs aren't functioning properly. And I'm not even technically quite at that stage of what you call obese. And I don't know what, you know, we should still be able to enjoy the comedy stylings of John Candy.
Definitely.
You know?
Yeah.
That fat bastard, he owed it to all of us. He had relational obligations to the world to put that hot dog down. You know, it's like,
yeah,
I reckon women can do whatever they need because their weight fluctuates and it's supposed to fluctuate. And yes, if they're chronically obese for too long and it doesn't fluctuate, then they have health problems too, but not like us. Men are like, we're a drain on our families. And that's a big drain because who's the one that has to wipe our asses for us when we have a stroke?
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
It's not your brother.
No.
It's not your father. It's not your uncle. This woman's got to wipe our ass for us, you know? So we have a bit of a responsibility, you know, to the people who care about us in our lives and who are going to be lumped with this unpaid work of looking after our big, sweating, entitled, bloody poxy bodies that, you know, I'll do what I want. I'll eat as many hot dogs as I like. It's a free world. Is it a free world? Is it a free world? You know, come into relation with the people who are going to experience the fallout from your poxy practices.
No, couldn't agree more. I can judge. It's a literal yardstick of how far out of relation I am, my waistline.
Yeah, that's it.
Usually because sometimes I can be that emotionally dense that I will gain weight and it will be the indicator like, you're probably quite depressed. You should look into this. Yeah. And it's
how distant are you feeling from your practice right now? Your spiritual practice? Like you're obviously a practitioner.
Oh, me? No, I'm good at the moment. I've just come off a 2-week dieta in the lead up to ayahuasca, and I'm still in the post ayahuasca glow. So
well that's the afterglow. And
I have a daily.
But in your as a baseline through your life, through your boring ass life, how's your practice going?
Good.
Is it as good as when you were rail thin?
Well, I've never been rail thin, but it's pretty close to that. This is I'm healthy and happy and losing weight and doing my daily spirit work and what have you.
Yeah. And it's working good on you. Well, you're doing better than me. So I'm just getting fatter by the day, and I'm not doing what I'm supposed to be doing. And I'm in bad relation here too. I'm really struggling to try and make those things work properly, which means my cognition is not working properly.
Yes, all of that.
You know, which means a lot of my communications are no good. But I'm stretched thin with this book audience business. I got too many relations.
You do, and also you're in an urban context. So I live on a permaculture farm in southern Tasmania. So you
lucky bastard. You're living on a permaculture farm. You're doing ayahuasca and all that stuff.
I know. And if I go back to the Gordon who lived in Zone 2, West London, that was the population, and he was 50 pounds, maybe more heavier.
Yeah.
Chain smoking, all the rest of it, drinking every night. So I get it. Everyone's
man.
To do this.
But you know, the other thing is have you fallen ass backwards into that life? Or you know, you probably had to spend a few decades, buddy.
Yeah.
You know, lining all your ducks in a row and all that to set that up for you, you know?
Got that right. That was the whole point of London was the money to be able to afford, and the only thing I could afford back in Australia is Australia's southernmost municipality. I'm like right on
which you can't afford it anymore.
No, I'm glad I got in.
Going.
Yeah.
Hey. That's deadly. Did you come into the market back when remember when there was like you could get a house for like $5,000 in Tassie for a while?
No, I wish it
Like,
was definitely a lot more than that. Definitely
yeah.
a lot more than that. But I think since we've been here, especially as everyone has overreacted to the story of what's going on the last 15 months, which is different to what is actually going on, that I think it must have appreciated by 40% in the 2.5 years since I've been here.
Yeah.
This is like one of those, there's not that much inventory in Tasmania. There's not that many houses each year. And now everyone thinks they can, I don't know, outlast a plague or something down here. So that's been good.
Well, that's it. But that's the thing. All of us, and the best that you can do is to move to London, or in my case, move to Melbourne and put in, 5, 10 hard years, do it real tough, scrape together enough cash to try and find one of the last places where the entropy isn't being outsourced to, and grab a bit of that, wall it off, try and pretend the rest of the world isn't there, and then, get things right locally, and then start looking out again and going, okay, how can I fractally start to scale this way of being out and interconnect with others, and try to get something together that might still be able to stand and sustain enough of us once the satellites start crashing out of the sky.
That's literally the game plan. So there you go.
That is the game plan. And I guess that's the bourgeois version of the elite bloody underground bunkers in New Zealand, eh?
So I've been thinking about that.
Except you don't have to worry about, you're worrying about networking out with people and having to make these supply chains and spheres of trust that are going right out regionally. You're having to do that work.
So that's literally what I think.
The billionaires in their bunkers, did you ever hear Rushkoff talking about when they consulted him? Douglas Rushkoff?
Yeah.
Wasn't that amazing?
Yeah.
Wasn't that amazing? They're asking, how can I make sure that my private army doesn't turn on me after the apocalypse? How can I make sure that they're protecting my bunker, but they're not just going to storm the bunker and kick me out of it? That is their genuine concern.
So my partner's Kiwi, and I lived in New Zealand for 7 years, and I have a bunch of Maori friends and whatever. And the answer to that is don't dig a bunker in New Zealand, because you won't, when it comes to it, you won't get Maori loyalty over their family. They're Iwi or some American billionaire. You idiot.
That's it. Yep. Oh man. If you've got some fella out there in a flak jacket and a black baseball cap, chewing a dwindling supply of tobacco with an AR-47.
Yep.
And there's all these Maoris coming up going, hey, what's going on here, bro? What you got down there, bro?
Right. Don't have Maori in your security force.
That's not that.
They'll not only eat your food, they'll eat you. They're, they don't fuck around with this stuff. And I think it's super funny, the places they're picking, like, the South Island of New Zealand, and like, so Ngāi Tahu are pretty warlike. So good luck. Like, in a good sense, that's something to be proud of.
Have fun there. Yeah. Well, at least your 1,000-year aged brandy reserves down there are going to go to a good cause.
Correct. So I think because I'm involved in permaculture, like I'm in Permaculture Tasmania on the committee. I'm actually the president of it. And I've given a lot of thought to the difference between permaculture and prepping. And permaculture only works in relation, and prepping is how you can possibly live out of relation. As far as I can tell, those are the two things. Like, permaculture doesn't work if it's not. Because otherwise they do look similar, right? Like, I do have, you are kind of planning for various disasters and things, but permaculture can only work in relation, or you're not doing
you're in permaculture, you're creating a network of relations. Yeah. A network of relations that could, when needed, be mobilized into a supply chain that would help everybody to thrive through some hard times. Yeah. And then potentially transform into whatever it needed to be after that. For me, that's what permaculture appears to be when it's being done right. It's about coming into relation with place and people and community. Prepping is just like, how long could I keep myself alive in a tiny space?
Like, and it's such a strange game. Like, would you honestly want to stay on Earth for another 3 years if you were living underground eating beans? Like, you think, just use those guns and just leave this dimension. Come on.
Yeah.
At some point, things can get bad enough that you're like, do you know what? I'm out. And I don't understand. I think it's such an unhealthy hobby. Yeah, anyway.
It is, but I mean, most things at the moment are, you can track them back to some weird rapture ideology.
Definitely.
Almost everything right now. Our economic systems, you know, everything, even just the whole thing of extraction itself.
Yeah.
You know, and sometimes I think that the only reason for like the US's, you know, complete and utter support for Israel is not coming out of an actual friendship, because they just seem to be so anti-Semitic. You know, so you've got all these anti-Semites like supporting Israel, and yes, it's there to try and you know, maintain their interests in the Middle East, like, you know, the Anglosphere's interests. Yes, there's that, but I feel like a lot of it is just trying to bring on that final book of Revelation, like that they need Israel to be there in order for Revelation to happen. Jesus, it's just so many people, so many young little adolescent cultures just with a death wish. And but everybody's nephew's like that at 17. You know, it's give me $50, uncle. No, fuck you, I got no money. Kill myself. You know, it's kind of, I think so. That's the West, they're sort of at that stage.
Yeah, I think so.
You know, but they'll be right. They'll find. There's so many good fragments there for people to pick up, and that's in that pattern of creation, and it doesn't take long to, you know, build it back together again. You know, if you have a good community, you know, you got own door there. Yeah.
Lucky last question, because I hadn't heard this before, and it's really changed my thinking around the dreaming. In the book, you mentioned, Tyson, that there is an earlier term for turnaround. Where explain to me, because I understand the origin of the terms like we got songline from Bruce Chatwin, even though it's a description of it's a European description of a thing that's kind of true, so it's a satisfactory enough term to use, etc. And dreaming is one of them. But I hadn't ever heard it called that, and it's can you tell me?
Yeah, well, there's all different. I mean, of course, there's different language name for that in every, you know, region. Every clan got a different sort of slightly different take on it. But there was an earlier Aboriginal English term that came out in around Western New South Wales, and that sort of spread all around. Like I think Western New South Wales was really interesting as an engine room for Aboriginal English that sort of got accepted everywhere. So even right up on Cape York, we'll call horse, our word for horse is Yarraman. And Yarraman, that was the Gamilaroi word for horse. So you see Gamilaroi, Wiradjuri, all them ones around there. A lot of the words they came up with for you know, English concepts, you know, or English words that we're using in a different way, or, you know, even new words in Aboriginal language to describe things that hadn't been before. So a lot of Aboriginal English and Creoles in Australia, anywhere you go, you'll find a few things from Western New South Wales. And yeah, that was one of them. That and I remember I've heard it in a few places, you know, a few times, but it's not very common anymore. You don't hear it much. But yeah, but that was there before the anthropologists and everything else had, you know, kind of ended up just sowing, you know, the idea of, you know, Jokorba into dream time and dreaming and all that sort of thing. But then Ophlos just use dreaming. They know what they're talking about.
Exactly.
You know, some people, like young people, and especially, you know, Aboriginal academics, you know, and scholars and, you know, critique doers, like they'll tend to go, oh, no, that's problematic, that term, we don't use that. But I'm like, well, whatever the old people want to use. So Munya says dream time, and she does it with no apologies. She's like, nah, dream time, that was the word I grew up with. You know, but a lot of people as well, they grew up with this idea of the turnaround, which that predates that English word of dream time. And the turnaround for me, it you know, it's like a verb. You know, it's showing an action, and that's the thing. That's the thing.
It's what I love.
It's a process.
Yeah, the sort of it's got that retained kinesis where kind of coming back to ceremony being a way of being both a metaphor and also a way of metaphorizing something into spirit so that it comes back transformed, so that it's part of that process, that turnaround. I'm like, wow, I actually, because
well, it's a feedback loop.
Yes.
It's the same as the feedback loop that's happening between you and me when we do ceremony.
Yeah.
You know, and when we're mirroring each other's actions and we're feeling that together, that feedback loop, and on it goes. It's the same as that. So turnaround, and that brings us back to the beginning of the yarn brass.
Yeah.
So that first story that you brought was Pirates of the Caribbean. And
exactly. Yeah.
Where that scene with the boat tipping the boat up.
Correct.
To get to the place that was on the map but wasn't in the territory. Boom. I'm like, the turnaround action right there.
And it's also
because there's little turnarounds happening all the time, and that's what creation is.
And it's the only way to get there. That's the crucial part. Like it's a small action that goes sideways rather than and that's kind of crucial. There's a Quechua term, aini, which basically means the same thing. It's the sort of energy of right relation. So the despachos that you give to Pachamama are transformed as, potato yield and yama babies and so on. But the actual process of being in right relation is a kinetic one of even the word gift doesn't work, right? So anthropologists like the gift economy. It's not quite, the exchange isn't quite as transactional as that. It's actually just to be in aini is to be in right relation. And it's that turnaround kinesis with neighbors, with animals, with Pachamama.
Well, there's almost this transmogrification happening.
Yeah, exactly.
With those plants and those root vegetables and the fat, from the pig and everything, that's coming through, but that's also the bodies, and your relatedness then is ancestral as well.
Absolutely.
So the exchange is not just happening between people who are here right now, it's going right back. But then your descendants are part of that as well. And so you're in this continuum where that transmogrification of fats through the ground and through the sweet potatoes and everything else and through those yams, that's happening intergenerationally, going right back and then going right forward. It's a big exchange and it's a big way of being in relation. And I do love that. I don't know much about it. I've got more of a picture of that kind of thing from New Guinea mob.
Sure.
To carry that one, but not much. I don't have a story for it.
No.
But I do appreciate it.
No, I think it's wonderful. And turnaround was just a term I'd been waiting to kind of, I don't want to say complete, but deepen understanding of dreaming, because it has the dreaming action you talk about in the book so much. The kinesis is in there. It is that dialogue's too small a word, but being in relation to it and having that kinesis. So it's wonderful. Like I said, I've been talking about this book since it came out. So So thank you very much, and an amazing chat. For people who want to know more, lay it on them. Where can they find out more about yourself and the book and what you got going on or coming up or any of that kind of thing?
No, not really.
Yeah.
I'm not here for marketing. I'm here for the yarn brass.
Very good.
So good.
I'll add the marketing.
Hey, go for it. That's what you need to do. Hey, there he is. All right.
Nice one. Well, once again, thanks so much. Thanks for the chat. Thanks for writing the book in the first place. And have a good one.
No worries. All right. See you later, Gordon.